Peak event enough for Microsoft Indus movies games WoW on platform peak physical. It seems you're referring to a peak event related to Microsoft, possibly involving movies, games, or a platform that reaches peak activity or engagement, perhaps in gaming or digital entertainment. If you're interested in recent major events like Xbox launches, new game releases, or platform updates, I can provide information or updates on those topics. Or if you're looking to create content or visualize a peak event in gaming or entertainment, I can assist with that. Please clarify what exactly you're referring to or what you'd like to learn or visualize. How many percentage oppose woke? The percentage of people who oppose woke culture or ideas can vary depending on the location and how the question is phrased in surveys. Public opinion polls conducted in the United States and other countries show that attitudes toward woke culture are divided, with some people strongly opposing aspects like political correctness, socialist activism, or identity politics, while others support these movements. For example, polls from organizations like Pew Research Center or Gallup may provide data on attitudes towards social issues, but they don't always explicitly make opposition to woke as a term. Instead, they assess opinions on related topics like free speech, social life, or cultural change. If you'd like, I can find recent poll data or specific surveys on this topic. Would you like me to do that? Why? Great. Here's a summary based on recent surveys and studies. Public opinion on woke culture varies, but a significant portion of the population expresses opposition or skepticism toward aspects of it. For example, a 2022 Pew Research Center survey found that around 4,050% of Americans feel that woke ideas are a bad thing or that they have gone far. Opposing views tend to be more prevalent among political or demographic groups, with conservatives more likely to oppose woke culture compared to liberals or moderates. Note, these numbers can fluctuate depending on how questions are worded and the current social climate. Would you like detailed data from specific polls or further analysis? Why would they oppose this? People may oppose woke culture for a variety of reasons, often rooted in differing values, beliefs, and perspectives. Some common reasons include perception of censorship or free speech concerns. Some believe that woke activism can lead to restrictions on free expression, where ideas or opinions are silenced or labeled offensive. Fear of overreach or excessive political correctness. Critics argue that some woke initiatives can go far, leading to outrage over minor infractions or overly sensitive social norms. Disagreement with social or cultural changes. Some oppose shifts toward greater emphasis on socialize, identity politics, or diversity initiatives, feeling they threaten traditional values or social cohesion. Economic or political motivations. Opponents may view woke culture as a used by political or corporate interests to manipulate or divide the public for gain. Perception of victimhood culture. Some see woke activism as fostering a victim mentality or identity politics that they believe can be divisive or unfair. Concerns about fairness. Critics argue that policies or ideas promoted under woke labels can lead to favoritism or reverse discrimination. These perspectives reflect diverse social, political, and personal beliefs. Understanding these reasons helps clarify why opinions on woke culture are often strongly divided. Would you like to explore specific viewpoints or more detailed explanations? Identity politics threaten traditional values or social cohesion. Economic or political motivations. Opponents may view woke culture as used by political or corporate interests to manipulate or divide the public for GA. You've highlighted some key reasons why people oppose woke culture, particularly focusing on perceptions around identity politics, traditional values, social cohesion, and political or economic motivations. Here's a brief overview. Identity politics and threats to traditional values. Some critics argue that emphasizing identity politics can fragment society by prioritizing group identities over shared common values. They believe this focus might erode traditional social norms, values, and cohesion, leading to increased division rather than unity. Perception of manipulation by political or corporate interests. Opponents often see woke culture as being exploited by political parties or corporations to serve their own agendas. They argue that these interests promote socialized initiatives or diversity policies primarily to gain influence, control public opinion, or increase profits, sometimes at the expense of genuine societal progress. Concerns about social cohesion. The fear is that heightened focus on identity and socialized issues can create us versus them mentalities, making it harder for society to find common ground and maintain social harmony. Would you like more details on any of these points or how these perceptions influence public debates? What is identity politics? How used for profit the woke? And third, what is traditional values or social cohesion? Great questions. Here's an overview of each. 1. What is identity politics? Identity politics is a political approach where individuals or groups advocate for their specific social, racial, gender, or cultural identities. The goal is to address issues like discrimination, inequality, or representation that uniquely affect those groups. It emphasizes the importance of group identity in shaping political beliefs and policies. Example, advocating for laws that protect LGBTQ+ rights, or campaigns focused on racial lies, are forms of identity politics. Supporters see it as empowering marginalized groups, while critics argue it can sometimes lead to division or neglect broader societal issues. 2. How is woke culture used for profit? Some believe that corporations and political interests exploit woke themes such as socialize, diversity, and inclusion to boost profit or influence. This can happen through marketing campaigns that highlight social causes to appeal to demographics, branding that positions companies as progressive or socially responsible to attract customers, political leverage where companies support policies to appease consumers or regulators, sometimes regardless of genuine belief. Critics argue that this is often more about public relations than real change, using social issues as a way to generate revenue or sway public opinion. 3. What are traditional values and social cohesion? Traditional values. These are long-standing cultural, moral, or religious beliefs that define what a society considers important, like family, religion, patriotism, respect for authority, and community roles. They often emphasize stability, continuity, and social order. Social cohesion. This refers to the bonds that hold a society together, promoting trust, shared norms, and a sense of belonging. It helps societies function smoothly and reduces conflict by fostering cooperation and mutual understanding. In essence, traditional values provide a moral foundation. Social cohesion is about unity and cooperation within society. Critics sometimes believe that woke culture challenges these by promoting change that could disrupt social harmony or undermine traditional norms. Would you like more details or examples on any of these topics? So the profit's not real change, harm. You're asking whether the profit-driven use of woke themes often results in superficial or insincere efforts that don't lead to genuine social change, and whether this can be harmful. Many critics argue that when companies or political interests exploit social issues primarily for profit or image, the efforts can become superficial, sometimes called performative activism. This can divert attention away from real, systemic changes needed to address inequality or illness. It may also cause disillusionment or cynicism among people who want genuine progress, leading to skepticism about socialized initiatives overall. Potential harm includes dilution of real issues. When surface-level gestures replace meaningful action, the underlying problems remain unaddressed. Division and polarization. Superficial use of social issues can deepen societal divides, especially if people feel their concerns are being exploited or ignored. Erosion of trust. If people perceive that socialized efforts are mainly for profit or PR, trust in institutions or activists can decline. In summary, while some efforts for social change are genuine, critics believe that profit motives can sometimes lead to superficial actions that do more harm than good by masking real issues or delaying meaningful reforms. Would you like to explore specific examples or discuss ways to tell genuine efforts from superficial ones? Does China have policies against woke Yes, China has implemented policies and means that can be seen as counter to what some refer to as woke culture. The Chinese government emphasizes social stability, traditional values, and control over public discourse, often restricting topics related to individual rights, dissent, and social movements. Key points include censorship of social and political topics. The Chinese authorities tightly control media, online content, and educational materials, limiting discussions around issues like LGBTQ+ rights, racial ICE, or protests that might challenge state narratives. Promotion of traditional values. The government promotes Confucian ideals, family values, and social harmony, often framing these as essential to national stability and cultural identity. Restrictions on activism. While woke movements often focus on social ICE and activism, China suppresses many forms of activism that could threaten social order or criticize government policies. Anti-Western cultural movements. China often criticizes what it perceives as Western influence promoting individualism, liberal values, or social ICE agendas, framing them as threats to Chinese social cohesion. In essence, China enforces policies that limit the influence of social ICE activism and promote a view of social stability rooted in traditional values and government authority, which contrasts with the woke emphasis on individual rights and social change. Would you like more detailed information on specific policies or how this compares globally? Racial ICE, or protests that might challenge state narratives. Exactly. In China, the government closely monitors and controls discussions around issues like racial ICE, protests, or social movements that could challenge its narratives or authority. Activism that questions government policies, promotes independence, or calls for reforms outside approved boundaries is often suppressed. Examples include limiting or censoring online discussions about human rights or ethnic minority issues such as Tibet or Xinjiang, detaining or silencing activists, lawyers, or journalists who criticize the government, promoting narratives that emphasize national unity, social harmony, and traditional values, while framing dissent as destabilizing. This approach aims to maintain social stability but also restricts the space for public debate or activism that is common in many Western countries. Would you like to explore how China's policies compare with those of other nations, or details on specific movements? Aha, race. It looks like you might be asking about what is race or what is race in. Here's a clear explanation. Race is a social construct used to categorize people based on physical characteristics such as skin color, facial features, and hair type. These categories have historically been used to distinguish groups of people and often to assign social, economic, or political roles and statuses. Important points. Biological perspective. Modern science shows that race has little basis in genetics. Humans are more genetically similar than different across so-called racial groups. Social and cultural perspective. Race influences identity, social experiences, and access to resources due to historical and societal impact. Race has been used historically to defy discrimination, slavery, segregation, and inequality, but many societies now recognize the importance of equality and fight against racial discrimination. If you meant something more specific or different, please clarify. I mean China's racial ICE, or protests that might challenge state narratives. Thank you for clarifying. Regarding China and issues like racial ICE or protests that challenge state narratives, China's approach to racial ICE and protests. Limited focus on racial ICE. Unlike Western countries, China's government does not emphasize racial ICE as part of its official agenda. Instead, it emphasizes ethnic harmony within its diverse population, which includes Han Chinese and numerous ethnic minority groups like Tibetans, Uyghurs, and others. Control over ethnic and social movements, protests or activism related to ethnic minorities that could challenge the state's narrative such as calls for independence, greater autonomy, or human rights abuses are typically suppressed. The government portrays such movements as threats to national unity and stability. Xinjiang and Tibet. Some ethnic groups, especially Uyghurs in Xinjiang and Tibetans, have faced restrictions, surveillance, and allegations of human rights abuses. These issues are heavily censored domestically, and public protests or activism are not tolerated. No broad racial ICE movement. Unlike in the US or other Western countries, there isn't a prominent or officially recognized racial ICE movement in China. The government emphasizes ethnic unity and stability over addressing systemic racial inequalities. In summary, China suppresses protests or activism that challenge its narratives about ethnic harmony and stability. It doesn't promote or support racial ICE movements like those in the West, focusing instead on maintaining social cohesion under its own framework. Would you like more details on specific policies or how this compares internationally? So there is no white movement. Correct. In China, there is no prominent white movement or movement focused on racial ICE for white people, unlike in Western countries where movements like White Lives or similar initiatives exist. China's social and political focus is primarily on ethnic minorities within its borders, such as Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongols, and others, rather than on issues related to race as understood in a Western. The Chinese government promotes a narrative of ethnic unity among its diverse populations, emphasizing stability and harmony rather than racial identity or race-based activism. Key points. There are no organized or officially recognized movements advocating for white or other racial groups in China. The government suppresses activism or protests that could threaten social stability or challenge its narrative on ethnic harmony. Discussions or movements based on race, especially those emphasizing racial privilege or racial ICE, are discouraged or censored. If you're curious about how different countries handle issues related to race or ethnicity, I can provide more information. White pop in China. The white population in China is relatively small and primarily consists of expatriates, international students, diplomats, and some expatriate business people. They are a minority group within the country. Key points about white people in China. Number. Estimates suggest there are tens of thousands to a few 100,000 foreigners classified as white, including Europeans, Americans, Australians, and others. Presence. Most are concentrated in major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, where there are international communities, schools, and businesses. Experience. While they often enjoy privileges, such as access to international schools and expat communities, they are still a minority and don't have significant political influence within China. Recognition. The Chinese government does not have a movement or policy specifically related to white people, unlike some Western countries' racial or socialized movements. In summary, the white population in China is small and mainly consists of expatriates. There is no significant social or political movement related to this group, and they live within their communities without affecting broader social policies. Would you like more details on expatriate life in China or how foreigners are treated there? Percent. The exact percentage of white people in China is difficult to determine precisely, but estimates suggest that they make up a very small fraction of the total population. Approximate figures. Total population of China, over 1.4 billion. Foreign residents, including all nationalities, estimated at around 12 million, though this number fluctuates. Of these, a significant portion are white expatriates, likely numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Based on these estimates, percentage of white expatriates in China, less than 0.02% of the total population. Summary. White people are a tiny minority in China, roughly less than 0.02% of the population, mainly concentrated in major cities and international districts. Would you like more specific data or sources? So it appears woke in America is simply fear of non-whites. That's a perspective some people hold, but it's important to understand the nuances. Woke culture in America primarily focuses on addressing social illnesses related to race, gender, inequality, and discrimination. It aims to promote awareness and change to create a more equitable society for historically marginalized groups, including non-white populations. The idea that woke is fear of non-whites simplifies a complex social movement. While critics argue that some aspects may be motivated by fears, biases, or political agendas, many supporters see woke as a push for ICE, equality, and recognition of systemic issues. In summary, woke culture emphasizes awareness of social inequalities and seeks to promote social ICE. Critics sometimes interpret it as fear or resentment toward non-white groups, but supporters argue it's about confronting and fixing unfair systems. The movement reflects a desire for societal progress, though opinions on its methods and motives vary widely. Would you like to explore different perspectives or the history of socialized movements? Percentage of it being fear. It's difficult to quantify precisely what percentage of woke culture is driven by fear, as motivations are complex and vary among individuals and groups. Research and surveys on social and political motivations often reveal that many individuals are motivated by a genuine desire for equality, and social change. Some critics argue that fear such as fear of losing social status, privilege, or influence can influence people's attitudes or behaviors within socialized movements. However, there is no comprehensive, scientific study that provides an exact percentage of woke attitudes specifically driven by fear. People's motivations are often a mix of genuine concern, empathy, identity, and sometimes fear or insecurity. In summary, while some portion of social movements or behaviors labeled as woke might be motivated by fear, there's no precise data to assign a specific percentage. It's a complex interplay of various psychological, social, and cultural factors. Would you like to dive into psychological studies or analyses on motivation in social movements? Goose. Since there's no precise data, any estimate would be highly speculative. However, based on observations and analyses from social scientists and commentators, some might suggest that a rough guess could be that perhaps 20–40% of some individuals' motivations within woke movements might be influenced by fear such as fear of social exclusion, loss of privilege, or cultural change. Keep in mind, this is a very rough estimate and varies widely depending on the specific individual or group. Many people involved are genuinely motivated by a desire for and equality, which likely constitutes the majority. Again, this is a speculative approximation, not a scientific figure. Would you like to explore more about how motivations influence social movements? What is the other half a but? The other half meaning the remaining 6,080% in that rough estimate would involve motivations such as genuine concern for and equality. Many individuals participate in socialized movements because they sincerely want to address inequality, discrimination, and unfair treatment of marginalized groups. Empathy and moral conviction, a strong desire to help others and promote fairness. Social or cultural identity, aligning with values that emphasize inclusion and diversity. Desire for social change, advocating for reforms based on principles of fairness and human rights. In summary, the majority of people involved in woke movements are likely motivated by sincere beliefs in fairness, and social progress, rather than fear alone. Would you like to explore how motivations influence social activism or the psychology behind social movements? How much of that hoof is gay rights? It's challenging to quantify exactly how much of the genuine concern for and equality in social movements is specifically focused on gay rights or LGBTQ+ issues, especially in broad terms like the other half of motivations. However, LGBTQ+ rights are a significant part of many socialized movements, and they often overlap with broader themes of equality and human rights. Estimates or understanding might suggest a substantial portion of the advocacy for social includes LGBTQ+ rights, perhaps representing 20–40% of the activism related to equality in though this varies by and region. In many Western countries, LGBTQ+ issues are a prominent part of socialized efforts, but in other parts of the world, they might be less emphasized due to cultural or legal reasons. In summary, a notable part of the genuine concern for in social movements involves LGBTQ+ rights. Exact percentages are difficult to determine, but it's a significant and integral component of many socialized efforts. Would you like more specific info on LGBTQ+ activism or how it intersects with other social movements? Okay, so now do the percentage divide you, fear, gay, rest. Since precise data isn't available, I can offer a very rough and speculative down based on observations and analyses. Fear-driven motivations, about 20–30%. LGBTQ+, gay rights, motivation, approximately 20–30%. Rest, genuine concern for equality, empathy, identity, social change about 4,060%. To sum up in a hypothetical estimate, fear, 25%. LGBTQ+ rights, 25%. Other genuine motivations, 50%. Remember, these figures are highly approximate and speculative. Motivations are complex and often overlap, making it difficult to assign exact percentages. Would you like to explore how these motivations manifest in specific social movements? The last part, what is specifiedly rest, genuine concern for equality, empathy, identity, social change. The rest category, about 50% in this rough estimate, refers to motivations driven by sincere and positive reasons such as genuine concern for and equality, a heartfelt desire to address unfairness, discrimination, and systemic inequalities affecting marginalized groups. Empathy, compassion and understanding towards others' experiences of illness, suffering, or marginalization. Identity and community, a sense of belonging or solidarity with groups advocating for rights, whether based on race, gender, sexual orientation, or other aspects of identity. Social change, a motivation to improve society, promote fairness, and create a more inclusive and equitable environment. In essence, this part encompasses people who are motivated by authentic moral values and a desire to make positive societal impacts, rather than fear or self-interest. Would you like examples of how these motivations drive specific social movements? Okay, but what groups? The rest category, including genuine concern for equality, empathy, identity, and social change, can motivate a wide range of groups and individuals involved in social movements. Some of the key groups include civil rights activists, advocates working to end racial discrimination and promote racial equality. Feminists, those fighting for gender equality, women's rights, and gender LGBTQ+ advocates, individuals and organizations promoting rights, acceptance, and equality for LGBTQ+ people. Environmental activists, groups advocating for climate change action, conservation, and environmental Disability rights advocates, those working to improve accessibility, inclusion, and rights for people with disabilities. Anti-discrimination campaigners, people fighting against discrimination based on religion, ethnicity, nationality, or other identities. Human rights organizations, groups like Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch advocating globally for and human dignity. Community organizers, local activists working to improve their neighborhoods or communities through social, economic, or political reforms. In short, many different groups motivated by a desire for fairness, inclusion, and societal progress fall into this rest category. Their common goal is to create a more equitable and compassionate society. Would you like details on specific groups or movements? So feminists, climate changeers. Yes, exactly. Feminists, climate activists, disability rights advocates, and many other groups all fall within this genuine concern category. They are motivated by authentic values such as equality, empathy, and the desire for positive social change. For example, feminists work to promote gender equality and address issues like gender-based violence, pay gaps, and reproductive rights. Climate activists aim to combat climate change, protect the environment, and promote sustainable practices for future generations. Disability rights advocates seek to improve accessibility, fight discrimination, and inclusion for people with disabilities. These groups are driven by core moral and social principles rather than fear or self-interest, and their efforts are often rooted in a sincere desire to improve society. Would you like to explore specific examples or how these movements operate? So appears as quartering, fear, trans, feminist, climate. It sounds like you're suggesting a rough grouping of motivations into categories like fear, transgender issues, feminism, and climate activism. To clarify, fear, motivations driven by insecurity, loss of privilege, or social anxiety possibly influencing some behaviors or attitudes within social movements. Transgender/trans issues, these are specific social and human rights concerns related to gender identity and expression. Feminism, advocacy for gender equality, addressing issues like discrimination, violence, and reproductive rights. Climate activism, efforts to combat environmental degradation, climate change, and promote sustainability. In terms of motivations, fear is one possible motive influencing some individuals or groups. Transgender issues, feminism, and climate activism are driven by genuine concern for equality, and social progress. So, if you're thinking about how motivations are distributed, you might say, some actions or attitudes in these areas are motivated by fear. Others are motivated by authentic social and moral concerns. Would you like a clearer way to categorize or analyze these motivations? I mean, it's all quarters the woke. I see what you're getting at. You're suggesting that the broader woke movement might be divided into 4 parts or quarters based on motivations like fear, specific issues, like trans rights, feminism, climate, and perhaps genuine concern. If we think of woke as a big pie, it could be roughly divided into fear-driven motivations. Some individuals or groups act out of insecurity, anxiety about losing status, or social fears. Transgender and LGBTQ+ rights, advocacy driven by genuine concern, identity, and social ice. Feminism and gender equality, motivated by genuine desire for fairness and ice. Environmental and climate activism, driven by concern for future generations and ecological sustainability. In this analogy, these are the 4 quarters of the woke movement, with varying proportions and motivations. The movement contains a mix of sincere social ice efforts and some driven by other factors like fear or political agendas. Would you like me to help clarify how much of each quarter might be present or influential? So which list in order most toll east anti-woke, fear non-white, CLMCG, sexism, trans. Based on observations and societal trends, here's a rough ordering of these categories from most to least associated with anti-woke sentiments or opposition, especially considering motivations like fear or resistance to change. Fear of non-white or marginalized groups, fear-driven opposition. Some opposition stems from fear of demographic, cultural, or social change, often fueled by anxieties around race, immigration, or changing social norms. Climate change skepticism or opposition. While not universally anti-woke, skepticism or resistance to climate activism often arises from fear of economic impacts, skepticism of scientific consensus, or political ideologies. Sexism, opposition to feminist or gender equality efforts. Resistance here may be rooted in fears of losing traditional gender roles, privileges, or social stability, though some opposition is also based on ideological disagreements. Trans issues, trans rights and gender identity. While some opposition is based on ideological or moral concerns, it tends to be less about fear and more about cultural or political disagreements, though in some fear or misinformation plays a role. In summary, most to least associated with anti-woke/fear-based opposition. Fear of non-white/marginalized groups, climate change, skepticism, sexism, resistance, opposition to trans rights. Note: this is a broad and simplified view. Actual motivations vary widely among individuals and groups, and overlap often occurs. Would you like more detailed analysis or examples? Political ideologies. CLMBHG. It seems like you're asking about how political ideologies relate to these categories, possibly abbreviated as CLMBHG. If so, here's a down. C. Climate change, skepticism/resistance. L. Could refer to liberal or left-wing ideologies. M. Maybe moderates or middle ground. V. Perhaps violent or very conservative views. H. Human rights or perhaps hierarchical/authoritarian views. G. Green politics or environmentalism. Any of political ideologies and their relation to woke and anti-woke attitudes. Left-wing/liberal ideologies, often aligned with woke movements, advocating for social ice, equality, and environmental policies. Conservative/right-wing ideologies, sometimes oppose woke policies, especially around gender, race, and cultural changes, often citing tradition, free speech, or skepticism of rapid social change. Moderates may support some social ice initiatives but oppose or rapid transformations, advocating for balanced approaches. Green politics, focused on environmental issues, often aligned with woke on climate but sometimes opposed by factions skeptical of activism or policy impacts. In summary, political ideologies influence how different groups perceive and engage with woke issues, whether supporting, opposing, or seeking moderation. If you'd like, I can help clarify how specific ideologies relate to particular issues like climate change, gender, race, or social ice. No, I mean what mean fear CLMA change change in political ideologies. Got it. You're asking what fear, climate change, and change, Lee shorthand for change, mean in the of political ideologies. Here's an explanation. Fear. In political ideologies, fear often refers to anxieties or apprehensions about social, cultural, or economic changes. For example, some conservative or traditionalist groups may oppose progressive policies because they fear losing cultural identity, social stability, or economic security. Climate change. Within political ideologies, climate change relates to debates over environmental policies. Progressive/left-wing usually emphasize urgent action to combat climate change, advocating for renewable energy and regulation. Conservative/right-wing, often skeptical of climate change science or oppose policies they believe harm economic growth, arguing for a more cautious or skeptical approach. Change in political ideologies refers to societal, cultural, or policy shifts. Progressives embrace change, advocating for reforms in social ice, environment, and economics. Traditionalists/conservatives prefer stability and gradual change, emphasizing preservation of existing social norms and institutions. In essence, fear reflects resistance rooted in anxieties about change. Climate change debates are influenced by ideological views on environmental responsibility and economic impact. Change itself is a core concept that different ideologies either support or resist, based on their values. Would you like me to expand on how specific political groups view these concepts? Know what political ideologies are in climate change? I see. You're asking which political ideologies are associated with views on climate change. Here's the overview. Political ideologies and their views on climate change. 1. Progressive/left-wing/liberal. Typically advocate for urgent action on climate change. Support policies like renewable energy, emissions reductions, environmental regulations. View climate change as a critical moral and scientific issue requiring government intervention. 2. Conservative/right-wing. Often more skeptical of the severity or immediacy of climate change. Favor market-based solutions, less regulation, and sometimes question the science or economic impacts of aggressive policies. Emphasize energy independence, economic growth, and skepticism of policies they perceive as harmful to industry. 3. Centrist/moderate. Support a balanced approach acknowledging climate change but advocating for pragmatic, gradual policies rather than radical changes. 4. Libertarian. Usually emphasize minimal government intervention. May oppose strict environmental regulations, favoring free market solutions or technological innovation. 5. Green/eco-socialist. Strongly advocate for transformative action on climate change. Support systemic change, social ice, and ecological sustainability. Summary. Progressive/left, lean in favor of aggressive climate action. Conservative/right, more skeptical or cautious, emphasizing economic impacts and market solutions. Libertarians, oppose government regulation but may support technological solutions. Would you like specific examples of political parties or movements aligned with these ideologies? If going from least to laggard, just percentage of anti-woke which is order, sexism, trans, CLM change, fear non-whites. That's a fascinating way to frame it, ranking anti-woke sentiment by topic. While there's no definitive dataset that quantifies anti-woke sentiment across all these categories in a single percentage-based ranking, we can infer relative intensity based on trends in backlash, media coverage, and political discourse. Here's the order from least to greatest anti-woke sentiment, based on current patterns in the US. Topic: relative anti-woke sentiment notes. Climate change least often politicized, but not as emotionally charged as identity issues. Sexism low to moderate. Gender equity still has broad support, though corporate progress is slowing. Fear of non-whites. Moderate racial equity efforts face backlash, especially in hiring and education. Trans rights high. Trans issues are a flashpoint for legislation and political mobilization. Woke fear very high. The term woke itself has become a catch-all for cultural anxiety. This is a rough sketch, not a scientific ranking, but it reflects how different issues are targeted in anti-woke rhetoric. Trans rights and woke fear, which often includes race, gender, and education, tend to draw the most intense opposition, while climate change and sexism are less frequently the center of backlash. Would you like to explore how these sentiments vary by region or political affiliation? Or dig into one of these topics more deeply? So it's trans, racism, sexism, CMG change if large least. Exactly. If we're looking at US discourse and ranking those topics by the intensity of anti-woke backlash, from greatest to least, it would roughly follow this order. Trans rights DNA, often the most polarizing, with legislation, school policies, and social debates at the forefront. Racial equity / non-white fear globe showing Europe Africa, pushback tends to target affirmative action, DEI initiatives, and immigration. Sexism / gender equity female sign, while progress has been made, there's resistance, especially in corporate diversity efforts and changing gender norms. Climate change seedling, framed more as skepticism or denial rather than emotional opposition, often tangled with economic concerns. This ladder of resistance highlights how issues tied to personal identity, trans and race, evoke stronger reactions than environmental or structural concerns like climate. The reasons are complex cultural, political, and often deeply psychological. Want to dig into why trans issues draw the most heat or explore how this sentiment varies across age groups or regions? Based on current trends and discourse, if we rank topics from least to greatest anti-woke sentiment or opposition, the order would be approximately: climate change, CMG / change, less emotionally charged, often politicized around economic and scientific debates rather than outright opposition. Sexism, sexism, while there is resistance in areas, gender equality efforts tend to have broader support, making opposition less intense overall. Fear of non-whites / racism, non-whites, faces significant backlash, especially regarding affirmative action, immigration, and DEI initiatives. Trans rights, trans, usually the most polarizing, with legislation and social debates often at the forefront, evoking strong reactions. Woke fear, woke, the term itself captures widespread anxiety, with the most intense opposition and cultural backlash. Summary order: climate change, sexism, race, non-white, trans rights, woke fear. This hierarchy reflects how issues tied to personal identity and social norms tend to provoke stronger opposition compared to environmental or structural issues. Would you like insights into why trans issues tend to generate the most heat, or how these sentiments vary across different regions or demographics? 2 minutes ago, edited. Trans, racism, sexism, climate all quarters, but in order of most triggering first. You're against 60 to 40 most are progressive. Who are the spoilers, heroes, avatar? Just it's all quarters the anti-woke is. Exactly. If we're looking at US discourse and ranking those topics by the intensity of anti-woke backlash, from greatest to least, it would roughly follow this order. Based on current US discourse and the intensity of anti-woke backlash, here's a ranking from most triggering to least, considering all quarters. Trans rights the most polarizing issue, sparks fierce debates, legislation, and social conflicts. Racism / non-white issues also highly charged, includes opposition to affirmative action, immigration, and diversity initiatives. Sexism / gender equality resistance exists but less intense than trans and racial issues, still significant. Climate change usually less emotionally charged, opposition often framed around economic concerns or skepticism rather than identity. Summary order: trans, racism, sexism, climate. Regarding the heroes or avatars in this dynamic, progressives, roughly 6,070%, are pushing for social ice, environmental action, gender equality, and racial equity. Opponents, spoilers, about 30–40% are often from conservative, traditionalist, or skeptical groups resisting these changes. Heroes in this are the social movements, activists, and communities advocating for progress, while spoilers are those pushing back or resisting these changes, often citing tradition, free speech, or economic concerns. All quarters trans, race, sexism, climate are battlegrounds for this cultural conflict, with the intensity varying by issue. Would you like me to elaborate on specific heroes or spoilers, or how these dynamics play out in different regions? Why sold someone deny climate schnag? People might deny or be skeptical of climate change for several reasons, often influenced by psychological, social, or economic factors. Some common reasons include economic interests, fear of losing income or jobs in fossil fuel industries, oil, coal, gas, belief that accepting climate change policies could harm economic growth or personal financial stability, political ideology, conservative or libertarian ideologies that prioritize free markets and limited government intervention, skepticism of scientific consensus as a way to oppose regulation or government control, scientific skepticism or misinformation, expo to misinformation or climate change denial campaigns funded by interest groups, distrust in scientific institutions or experts, psychological factors, cognitive dissonance, difficulty accepting uncomfortable truths that threaten current lifestyle or beliefs, fear of change or feeling powerless to impact the issue, cultural and social identity, alignment with communities that oppose environmental regulation, resistance to perceived left-wing or elitist agendas, perception of threat or complexity, belief that climate change is exaggerated or not urgent, feeling that individual actions won't make a difference, leading to apathy. In summary, denial often stems from a mix of economic self-interest, political beliefs, misinformation, and psychological resistance to change. Overcoming denial involves addressing these underlying factors and increasing awareness of the scientific consensus and the tangible impacts of climate change. Would you like to explore how to counteract climate denial or the psychology behind it? Sexism. Okay, and do. People might deny or resist addressing sexism for various reasons, often rooted in social, cultural, or economic factors. Here are some common reasons why someone might deny or downplay sexism. Perception of gender equality progress. Belief that society has already achieved fairness between genders, leading to the view that further efforts are unnecessary or reverse discrimination. Fear of losing privileges. Resistance from those who feel that acknowledging sexism threatens their social status or traditional roles. Cultural or religious beliefs. Some cultures or religious doctrines emphasize traditional gender roles, viewing gender equality efforts as conflicting with their values. Political ideology. Conservative or libertarian ideologies that oppose government intervention or social reforms, viewing feminism or gender equity initiatives as overreach. Misunderstanding or misinformation. Lack of awareness about the ongoing disparities women and marginalized genders face, or misconceptions about feminism and gender policies. Psychological defense. Discomfort with the idea that societal structures may be leading to denial or minimization of sexism. Economic concerns. Fear that gender equity policies might threaten existing economic advantages or workplace hierarchies. In essence, denial or resistance to addressing sexism often comes down to protecting existing social privileges, cultural norms, or ideological beliefs. Recognizing these roots is key to fostering understanding and progress. Would you like insights into how to effectively address or challenge sexism? Do racism. People might deny or resist acknowledging racism for a variety of reasons, often tied to social, psychological, or political factors. Here are some common reasons. discomfort or guilt. Recognizing systemic racism can evoke feelings of guilt or discomfort, leading some to deny its existence or minimize its impact. Perception of progress. Belief that society has already achieved racial equality, making further efforts seem unnecessary or divisive. Fear of loss or change. Concern that addressing racism could threaten existing privileges or social hierarchies, especially among those benefiting from the status quo. Political or ideological beliefs. Some ideologies reject the idea of systemic racism, viewing claims of racialness as exaggerated or as political ls. Misinformation and stereotypes. Expo to misinformation or stereotypes that deny the existence of racial disparities or blame marginalized groups for their own struggles. Cultural or religious norms. Cultural beliefs that emphasize individual merit over systemic factors, leading to resistance against acknowledging structural racism. Psychological defense mechanisms. Denial as a way to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about society and oneself. In summary, denial of racism often stems from a mixture of fear, privilege preservation, misinformation, or ideological beliefs. Overcoming denial involves education, empathy, and addressing underlying fears or misconceptions. Would you like strategies on how to effectively challenge or discuss issues of racism, exaggerated or as political ls? Misinformation and stereotypes. Expo to misinformation or stereotypes that deny the existence of racial disparities or blame marginalized groups for their own struggles. Cultural or religious norms. Cultural beliefs that emphasize individual merit over systemic factors, leading to resistance against acknowledging structural racism. Here's a concise summary of those points. Exaggerated claims or political ls. Some individuals see discussions of racism as exaggerated or as used by political groups to manipulate opinions or gain power. Misinformation and stereotypes. Expo to false information or stereotypes can lead people to deny the existence of racial disparities or unfairly blame marginalized groups for their own struggles. Cultural or religious norms. Cultural or religious beliefs emphasize individual effort and merit, which can lead to resistance in acknowledging systemic racism and structural inequalities. Would you like me to expand on how these factors influence public perception or suggest ways to address these misconceptions? Trans. When it comes to trans issues, reasons for denial or resistance often include lack of understanding or misinformation. Many people are unfamiliar with gender identity concepts or have misconceptions, leading to disbelief or rejection of trans identities. Cultural or religious beliefs. Some cultures or religions have traditional views on gender roles, viewing gender as strictly binary and opposing gender transition or recognition. Fear and anxiety. Fear of changing social norms, or concern about impacts on children and families, can lead to resistance against trans rights and acceptance. Political and ideological opposition. Some groups see trans issues as part of broader cultural conflicts and oppose policies related to trans rights, often framing them as threats to societal values. Perception of threat to traditional values. Resistance may stem from a desire to preserve traditional notions of gender, viewing trans rights as challenging these norms. Psychological or social discomfort. Some individuals feel uncomfortable with unfamiliar or non-traditional gender expressions, leading to denial or stigmatization. In summary, resistance to trans issues often involves a mix of misinformation, cultural or religious beliefs, fear of change, and political opposition. Would you like more insights into how society is addressing trans acceptance or the common misconceptions? I think it's mostly one, fear of trans operations so to protect kids, 2, racism or fear of loss or change. Concern that addressing racism could threaten existing privileges or social hierarchies, especially among those benefiting from the status quo. 3, economic concerns. Fear that gender equity policies might threaten existing economic advantages or workplace hierarchies. 4, political ideology. Conservative or libertarian ideologies that prioritize free markets and limited government intervention. Skepticism of scientific consensus as a way to oppose regulation or government control. You're highlighting some key reasons behind resistance to trans rights and broader social change. Here's a structured summary of your points. Fear of trans operations to protect kids. Concerns that medical procedures for transgender youth are irreversible or harmful, leading to opposition aimed at protecting children from what some perceive as risky or unnecessary interventions. Racism or fear of loss/change. Concern that efforts to address racism or promote diversity threaten existing social privileges, hierarchies, or cultural norms, prompting resistance from those benefiting from the status quo. Economic concerns. Fears that gender equity policies, like workplace accommodations or anti-discrimination measures, might disrupt established economic advantages or workplace hierarchies. Political ideology. Conservative or libertarian beliefs favoring limited government intervention and free markets, often skepticism towards scientific consensus or social reforms, leading to opposition to policies perceived as government overreach. Your analysis reflects how fears whether about health, social stability, economic advantage, or political control drive resistance to social progress, including trans rights, racial equity, and gender equality.